If you're looking for the best lights for video, you have come to the right place. There are a lot of different lighting options, so I thought I'd run through my personal recommendations on what I think are some of the best lights you can get for video production. So to start it off, we'll start with the ARRI 650. This is a tungsten light. ARRI makes a bunch of lights in this series. There's a 300 watt, a 150, there's 1Ks, 2Ks, and higher. And these are the lights that you've probably seen on Hollywood sets, TV shows, independent films. These are kind of the lights, the iconic lights. So if you buy these, you at least can look the part. I don't know if it'll necessarily fit your needs, but you'll look pretty legit. Besides that, they're tungsten lights, so they do consume a lot of power and they get really, really hot. Like if you leave them on and you touch them, you will burn yourself. And while you might know that, other people around you may not. So always keep that in mind. These lights are really great, especially for color rendering. You may have heard of people talking about CRI and how tungsten light or sunlight in general look kind of better than fluorescent or LED or some of the other options out there. And that's true. Tungsten lights look fantastic. They render very nice color across the entire spectrum. You don't have any spikes in your red or your green. It's very even, very natural looking. And me personally, I really like how tungsten renders color. But these lights just aren't for me, and I'll tell you why. Right off the bat, they're Fresnel lenses, and a Fresnel lens gives it a really nice even spread. So from the left side to the right side of the beam, it's very even. You don't get variations in light intensity like you would with like a Parnell or a Par light. But it's still very harsh. It's very direct light. So you're going to get those harsh shadows, the hard lines. And that's really good for throwing texture up on a wall or casting shadows when you want to. Most of the time, if what most people want to do, the kind of professional look, is soft lighting. Just like the shallow depth of field lends itself to being, more flattering or more pleasing to look at, most people tend to prefer softer light. That's not a hard and fast rule. It is just in general, you're probably going to get more versatility out of a softer light. And that's not to say you can't make this light soft. You certainly can. You get like a soft box and attach it. They make some like heat resistant soft boxes that you can put on here. You could shoot it through a panel of diffusion. You could bounce it off of, a white wall or a sheet or something. But in general, there's a lot of workarounds with these lights. And there's even some, cheaper knockoff ones. So if, budget is a concern, you could get a cheaper one like this Limo Studio 650. It's essentially the same thing. It's not assembled quite as nice as the ARRI, but it'll do the job. And so if you can afford it, get the ARRI. But if you're looking to cut costs, you can get something like this. And in terms of the light quality, it'll be very, very similar. But I don't like. It's not that I don't like it. I've shied away from using more traditional hot lights like these tungsten lights, just because they get so hot and they consume so much power. You got to worry about blowing a circuit or someone burning themselves, or just the room getting hot and then having people asking like, hey, can we turn the AC on? And then you're like, no, we can't turn the AC on because that causes noise and we got to worry about audio. So it just ends up making a little bit more trouble than it's worth, in my opinion. Certainly a good option. A lot of people use them, but you have to know the limitations because it usually takes a little bit kind of working around it. And it's certainly easier on a larger film set or a TV production rather than, some independent productions where you don't always have the space or the crew to handle it. So a lot of people look at these lights, LED lights. Now, I just got to say, I've never really been a fan of LED, and I know the technology keeps getting better and better, and they keep saying that the CRIs are getting higher and higher, and it's indistinguishable. But that usually comes at a really expensive price, and you end up spending thousands of dollars for one light fixture, and most of the time you need, 2, 3, or 4 lights. And so I've never wanted to invest that much money in something that I was concerned about, because, with LEDs, the biggest problem from my perspective is you don't really know the quality you're getting. There's obviously reviews you can go look up, and there's cheaper lights, more expensive ones. Hopefully you get what you're paying for. But the other problem with LEDs is you have all these little point sources of light, and oftentimes you'll see people pointing these directly at their subject, and I just think it looks weird. You've got all these little points for the catch light in the eyes or in the specular highlights, and you've got all these little point sources of light casting separate shadows, and it can make for some really funky imagery sometimes, especially when the shadows are a different color. And so you end up having to diffuse these as well, which, you know, hey, maybe not be a problem, but it's not gonna right out of the gate. It's not going to give you the most flattering light. LEDs are probably a little bit more versatile in terms of kind of the options they give you. Certainly consume far less power than tungsten lights. So if you are worried about blowing a circuit or you need to run the light off like a car battery or something like that, LED would be the way to go. But there are just some trade-offs, especially with the light quality. I've never seen footage shot with an LED where I've been happy with the way it rendered color, especially skin tone. But another great thing about LED is that they are a little bit more robust in terms of design. Usually the more expensive units, some of the cheaper ones have kind of shoddy construction, but some of the higher end ones are a little bit more durable, especially when you're dealing with like tungsten lights and you got to worry about the filament inside potentially breaking. But if it does, you know, that's just a light bulb swap. Some of these LEDs I've used, the electronics and just the way it's been put together has not been the greatest. You know, things kind of glued together and it gets a little bit warm and it falls apart. Oh, speaking of warmth, that's another thing. I've used LEDs that have changed color temperature the longer they've been on. So you flip the light on, 30 minutes later, it looks different than it did when you first fired it up. And that's not to say that it just needed to warm up. It was like as it got warmer and was on longer, it shifted more and more in color, which is another problem you probably don't want to have to deal with. So that brings me to my actual recommendation for what I would recommend is a fluorescent light. And these, you know, certainly aren't perfect for every scenario. It's very hard to cast, you know, harsh shadows if you're going for a more dramatic look. But kind of the best light, if I had to pick one of just, hey, here's what you should get if you're getting your first light or you want just your go-to light, get something like this. Now, KinoFlow makes the Diva series, which is really nice because the ballasts are built in. But these, again, are really expensive. You know, it seems like professional film equipment is never cheap. However, I did find these. And $90 is certainly better than $1,500. So I figured, why not? I'm going to take a risk. I'll buy one of these. Very similar specs. The KinoFlow Diva is a four bulb fixture, and this Limo Studio one also is a 4-bank light panel. And the great thing about fluorescence, first of all, you get the same benefits you have with LED, where it runs at a cool temperature, consumes far less power, a little bit more versatile in terms of being soft, kind of right off the bat. You've got that kind of like bigger light source, but fluorescents especially have that nice indirect light from the get-go. And what I do with these lights is I diffuse them even further. If I really need something soft, I'll put a big, you know, panel of diffusion up, and you can just fill that in, and all of a sudden you've just made, you know, 5 foot by 4 foot light source or something, you know, just something massive and super soft. And it works great. So my actual experience with using these lights hands-on, they're not as nice as the Divas, but for the price being, you know, less than 1/10 of the cost, you really can't beat it. The Divas are great because on the back there's kind of this ball mount where you can kind of twist and rotate. So you can mount them vertically, you can mount them horizontally, you can move and maneuver them. These Limo Studio ones don't have that functionality, unfortunately. You can only mount them horizontally. But all things considered, most of the time you're probably going to want to mount them horizontally. And if you do need to do it vertically, you can probably find a little, you know, gobo head or something attachment there to where you can mount it vertically. Another thing I really like about these lights is that while they're fluorescent and the bulbs are fragile, they're pretty well constructed, all things considered, for a $100 light. You know, it's not the strongest thing in the world. The Divas are a little bit better constructed, but they haven't fallen apart, and I've been shooting with them for about 6 months now. And I really like the way they look, except for the fact that they do have a green tint. As with most fluorescent lights and with LEDs, you'll kind of get used to the fact that they don't render color perfectly like the tungsten lights do, but you can work around it. You buy a cheap sheet of minus green gel, whether it's a quarter or an eighth minus green, and you put that sheet of magenta up to kind of pull that green out and supplement it with magenta. And by doing that, the light is perfect, nearly anyway. That you can do slight, touch-ups in post-production, as you're probably going to do anyway. But initially, I was a little concerned with the green spike in these, but with the minus green, you can't even tell anymore. And the KinoFlow bulbs are, better CRI, but again, you're paying so much more for something that may or may not be noticeable. You obviously have to use your own judgment, but for me, these have worked great. I will say that this weird pink back paneling, mine did not show up that way. And I should say, I bought this 4-bank, and there's also a 6-bank and a 2-bank available as well. I bought all 3 just because, why not? Figured I'd risk it, and if they were junk, I could return them, and hey, they weren't too expensive. But they didn't show up with this pink backing. I don't know what that is. Mine actually showed up with a green backing, oddly enough. And that was really like a lime green. And I was really worried that, like, oh gosh, what did they do? And thankfully it was just a little film, kind of like a protective film over the silver reflector. So I peeled it off, and it's all just this mirror finish in there just to kind of bounce the light around. So I don't know why this picture is pink on Amazon. I've looked at other places for these lights and haven't found them anywhere. There's not even really other ones like it. You can see the related stuff is either other versions of the same light or LEDs and tungsten lights and whatnot. So I've done a little bit of searching, and I've only found them on Amazon from this. This is actually a different seller than who I bought it from. Actually, from Limo Studio. Oh no, sold by Kim Outlet, same one. So it's just by Limo Studio. It's a brand. But yeah, Kim Outlet. I'll post a blog article on my website and have links to all this stuff so you can check it out for yourself. But yeah, my recommendation, if you're looking for a light kit, there are the other fluorescent softbox kits, but what I don't like about those is you have all the bulbs that aren't easily transportable. The nice thing about doing the 4-bank like this, similar to the KinoFlow, is that it's one compact unit that you can just throw in a Pelican case or some other means of transportation, and it just stays flat and square, and you don't have to worry about these loose bulbs kind of just floating around like those softbox kits where they kind of have I don't know what the best way to describe it would be, but you have these different bulbs sticking off in different directions, and you can get softbox kits that only have one bulb, but then you're, severely underpowered when you're filming in bright environments. So these work really, really well. And there's probably not a softbox that you can buy for them. Shooting directly with these lights is very soft. I would recommend diffusing it. I actually have the sheet of diffusion that comes with another softbox kit that I have. I hijacked that that cloth, that diffusion, and I just mount it in front of this one like a sheet of diffusion. You could do the same thing with like diffusion gel, like Opal or something like that. But I also oftentimes will shoot it, like I said, through a huge panel of diffusion just to really get the biggest light source possible. Oftentimes you want to make really soft, flattering light for your subject, and that's a good way to do it. Or if you need to light two subjects where you're doing, some kind of a scene, like a scene of dialogue, but back and forth between two characters, you have a big light source, and you can light both of them with the same light. So, like I said, I'll post a blog about this so you can kind of check out the links and see what makes the most sense. But the tungsten lights eat up so much power and just operate so hot that it really becomes a nuisance. And the LEDs, I'm sure there's good models out there. I just have never personally used them and I've never been happy. And most of the stuff that's in the price range of these fluorescents is, you know, how good is this light? Who knows? How bright is it? That's another thing. These fluorescent lights, very, very bright. Surprisingly bright, actually. I was a little blown away by how bright they were. Actually, bright exactly where I need them to be, oddly enough. They don't have a dimmer on this model. This does come with a stand, funny enough. But yeah, no dimmer. There are 2 little switches, though, to where you can do just 2 bulbs or all 4 or none. And likewise, on the 6 bank, you have you control them in sets of 2. So you have 3 switches on the 6 bank, and on the 2 bank, you only have 1 switch. So unfortunately, there's no dimmer like on the Kinos, but hey, you kind of get what you're paying for, and you can, you know, throw diffusion on there or something else to kind of knock down that light if it is too bright, which most of the time it's probably not going to be. So check them out. Let me know what you think.